Alright, welcome to this chess video. We have a really interesting instructional game for this one. This is a very recent game of mine that I actually played at my over-the-board chess club, but this game was really interesting, but not for the conventional sense. My opponent begins with e4, pretty standard, and I do something a little bit different. In this game I actually play pawn to b6. It's not my usual setup, but every now and then, especially when you're playing in person with the regular people or tournament after tournament, it's good to kind of mix up your openings a bit, that way you're not as predictable. They of course grab the center with d4, and I can fianchetto straight away. That's of course a very solid way to play this. But from studying some of the main ideas in this opening, very often I'll be playing the pawn move e6 at some point. And to try and keep my options open and confuse my opponent a little bit, I just delayed bishop to b7 just for one extra move. They play their knight to f3, and now that I've delayed this, I've actually taken away the option of them playing pawn f3 to support this e-pawn. And so this is actually a really good opportunity for me to now fianchetto my bishop. So I do so. They now defend their pawn this way, which is still opening theory and still objectively about equal. But now I can start striking in the center, play pawn to c5. They don't want to take and give up their center, so they play pawn to c3, still opening theory. And of course, I really don't love taking now, because if they take back, now they've now freed up this square for their knight. And so I would prefer to maintain the tension, or at least not capture on d4. As after a little bit of thinking here, I played a move which is interesting, but objectively it is not best. Probably best was to just simply continue development, possibly play for the center. But instead of that, I played a move which normally is not so great, but here it kind of made a little sense to me, which is to play pawn c4. And the very obvious drawback to this is I am giving up the center, and I'm also giving up the tension that I had on the center. Generally, you don't want to be pushing your pawn and then getting rid of this pawn tension, because now I can never capture here. But my idea was a bit inspired from playing the Polish opening, where just like in that opening, I'm offering up this pawn here in exchange for this more centralized pawn. My opponent probably doesn't want to capture c4, and so I think objectively better was for them to just simply drop back to c2 and keep this pawn defended. But in this game, they actually kind of surprised me here, and they do capture, which the computer does not love. And so now I gain their central pawn, which looks like a good victory for me. Objectively still about equal, but at least for the center standpoint, I feel better, because now they've only got one of their central pawns on the board, losing this pawn, whereas I still have both of mine. So long term, I might have better pawn control in the center. They castle, which is fine. And once again, I should be controlling the center. Something like knight f6 would have been a good way to do so while developing pieces and helping me prepare to get castled. But playing in theme with this kind of unorthodox setup, I now choose queen to c7. Objectively not best, but I am attacking their bishop. And if they bring their bishop back to e2, well then I can continue developing, and I think I have a playable setup. But here's where things get a little more interesting, because they play rook to e1, which looks like it just hangs this material. It doesn't quite, and that's why I said this game gets really intriguing. So I thought I was just winning material. I capture this knight, which looks kind of strange, because I'm of course taking an undeveloped piece. But in the process of doing so, if they just take back, I've simply won material. And this is a very rare moment where my opponent actually did not see that. They just took here and simply lost the bishop. Just a lapse of judgment, and that kind of thing happens. But I'm actually not completely winning here. And this is why this game is interesting, because I actually have really go back and forth, despite the fact that I'm up material. I mean, one of the hardest things to do in chess is convert a winning position, and this is a really good example of that, because your opponent can have a lot of counterplay, and in this position, although black is slightly better for now, I actually wasn't winning for the rest of the game. Now let me show something that we both missed that would have made this even better. If we go back here, instead of recapturing this bishop on b1, they had a really surprising in-between move. They could have played bishop d5. That actually saves the bishop, and I cannot capture it because, of course, the pawn is pinned to my king. And so I would, of course, have to block this idea on my rook. So knight c6 is really the only move that I have. Now they can recapture, and if I continue to develop, they have time to save their bishop. So this would have been a little bit better. So even though it looked like I was winning material on c4, with best play, that bishop d5 idea, I actually wouldn't have been able to. Now going back to the real game, like I said, they did miss this, and I did capture here, but we are far from done. We have a lot of work left to do in this game, because they play knight to e5. Very natural idea, gaining tempo on my queen. But now I should have played queen d5. Of course, it was a candidate move to keep my queen in the center, but what I really didn't like about this is now it walks into c4. And then I thought I have to move again, and it's not really great. Something like queen d6, they might have bishop f4. And although it's about equal, it's not really something I love. Apparently, this was the best line here because queen b7. And it looks kind of shameful to be dropping the queen all the way back here, but it is very important that I keep this queen on this diagonal. Now we're about to see why very shortly, but my queen c7 move does not do that. And so here we have the really cool idea, queen f3. After queen f3, they're threatening checkmate, and they're also threatening my rook in the corner. And so I thought I could actually address both of these in a clever way, which turned out to actually not be best. Again, this is very unbalanced, and even though I'm up 3 points of material, the engine actually says that white has compensation here, and the game is actually still about equal. I played the move pawn d5, I thought was clever, because now I'm defending the checkmate and also blocking off this diagonal. But apparently even stronger than d5 would have been to play the very bold looking pawn to f6. And the best line is for them to give a check. I played g6 and try and kick them back. But let's take a look at the very natural idea instead, which is of course grabbing my rook. And in that case, I now grab their knight, they take back, and then knight e7. And even though I've given back the material, their queen is really out of play. This knight is probably going to go somewhere like f5. I continue to develop, and then my rook, after I castle, even has this half-open file. And black is actually slightly better here. But okay, back to the real game. Of course, I played pawn d5, and now they play bishop to f4 here. What's really interesting is, although they play this next move, this knight to f7 coming up, it would have been stronger to do that right away. It looks like it would just give up material, but if I go this route, now they have queen captures d5, and once again, this is pinned. I can't capture their queen, and they're still attacking my rook. And objectively, white is actually a smidge better here. It's amazing that I can be up 4 points of material, but actually losing as there isn't really a good way to save my rook in the corner. But it's a little bit different after bishop f4 right away. I chose to block, so there's no discovered attacks on my queen. And now knight captures f7 is actually a mistake, because I can just capture this way. And if they were to capture on d6 as I anticipated, then I'm still up material and I can then get the queens off the board. But now they play queen captures d5, again making use of this pin while attacking my corner rook. And so this is where I have a little bit of a think here, because I thought overall I was playing fairly well, but I really can't allow them to turn the tables on me. The biggest priority is having my king stuck in the center, and I am up by 4 points of material. And so what I thought was I could actually afford to give up this rook. If they capture, like in the variation we looked at, their queen is actually out of play. The queen really doesn't belong on the edge of the board when it should be much more active. And so I played bishop captures f4, so currently up by 7 points of material. They played this check that I anticipated, with the main idea that I can now block with the knight. And I'm just simply preparing to get castled. I don't mind giving up my rook in the corner if they take, and now I'm kind of asking them what they're supposed to play from here. They doubled rooks. I castle, get my king out of danger. Funny looking that I actually hadn't castled this far into the game. And I don't mind giving back this knight. I'm already up 6 points of material, and if they do that, of course, in this position, I could get the queen. But even if it was a simple queen trade, I'd still be up by 3 points going into the endgame. So no, the real testing move here is, of course, can they capture this rook? And I'll be honest, in the game, I didn't even give this much thought. I thought for sure that they were going to instead save the queen, something like here, and try and hang on that way. That way they have really strong pressure on the open file. But no, they actually decided to capture the rook, and I actually remember thinking in the game, like, seriously, they can actually take this? I really don't believe it. This queen is so out of play, and even though I've given back most of my material, this really can't be good for them. And this is a pretty instructional moment, I think, because a lot of chess players, when they give up a rook or something like that, they start thinking, oh, my advantage is starting to slip, the game is turning back, and I'm the complete opposite way. I wasn't always that way, but in this case I definitely am. Where here, you really have to be thinking, I was winning most of this game, and as brutal as it sounds, you just have to kind of kick them when they're down. It sounds pretty savage to be thinking this way, but that is what chess is like, especially at the higher levels. Because you know that your opponent will definitely fight back if they get the chance. And so I have to play very forcing moves and continue attacking. I can't let up and take my foot off the gas even for a little bit. And that's where I found this idea I was really happy with, which is just bishop e3. It's actually very simple. I just simply add way more pressure to this pawn, and they cannot hold their king from getting checkmated. The best I thought they really have is just queen f3, but they're down by material already. If they bring their queen back to f3, I don't have to trade queens, I would just grab their hanging rook. Now instead of that, they captured with this rook that would have been hanging, and of course this overlooks the checkmate threat. This is where your puzzle rush really comes in handy. There's just simply queen captures f2 check. Their king is forced to move over, and then I have a really cool idea, of course, very simple, very common pattern, where I play this queen sacrifice that must be accepted. Only legal move, and then I have checkmate. Now this game left an impression on me because even though I won material pretty early, probably partly because of playing an opening they weren't familiar with, you really had to keep your wits about you because Queen F3 was something that was a lot stronger than I anticipated. If we return back to this position, this is about equal, even though black is actually up an entire piece. Yes, we won the bishop on c4, but it's very difficult to hold this rook. And so white actually has some compensation here. Additionally, it usually is not a good idea to have a setup like I have. You look at all these undeveloped pieces, these also undeveloped, my queen barely off the back rank, and my king uncastled. But this is generally what you want to avoid. And so really, it's actually not that surprising that even though I'm up material, white has compensation here. Now d5 was adequate enough for the game, but even stronger would have been f6. And I didn't go into this line too much, but what's actually really interesting is if we were to go here, we're actually still giving up a rook, it's just the other rook. We'll actually go into this line, and then the very powerful yet simple idea, just king f7. And very similar to the queen getting out of play here, this queen is actually cut off. If they play here, we'll just block. And if they try and rescue their queen coming all the way back, then black is actually untangling with the move knight c6, and black is actually winning this game, even though material is equal. And now we take a look at their pieces, it's actually white who is actually the one undeveloped, and this queen also not doing too much on the edge of the board. So even though it was kind of in disguise with this game, really a big factor of this game was just how powerful it is having one side with their pieces undeveloped. That is something that you generally want to avoid, and it's really dangerous when you give that kind of power to your opponent. So I thought this was an instructional game that actually had kind of a few lessons layered into it. Let me know what you thought in the YouTube comments. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next chess video.